couple of weekends ago, my wife and I were traveling home with our 4 boys from a soccer tournament. After a full weekend of games, the aroma in the van was, well, let's just say a little pungent. But every once in a while, the smell in the van would get incredibly bad, and I couldn't figure out why, until I looked over and one of my boys' feet touched the side of my face. His damp, smelly sock touched the side of my face. It was terrible. Now, most people, when they think of feet, think of misshapen toes, bad toenails, and a terrible aroma. Feet are just simply not beautiful. But there were 2 biblical writers who chose to write about beautiful feet. How is this possible? I remarked in our last Anchor of Hope that in the past God spoke through the prophets in many different ways and at many different times. And the first of these authors was one of those prophets. His name was Isaiah. In Isaiah 52 verse 7, he says, "How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace and who bring good tidings and who proclaim salvation." You see, the Jewish people had spent almost 70 years exiled from their homeland, aliens in a land that wasn't their own, and they longed to go home. So when Isaiah gives the picture of a person who comes bounding over the mountains, which separated them from their homeland, yelling at the top of their lungs that the war was over, there was peace, and that they could finally go home, it was incredibly good news. The feet of that messenger were beautiful because of the news that they carried. Centuries later, after a long period when God seemed silent and distant, as the Jewish people once again found themselves oppressed, constantly threatened, heavily taxed, and in a famine of leadership, and feeling aimless and hopeless, new messengers show up on the scene. They come not bounding over the mountains, but right out of heaven itself. An angel appears to a group of Jewish shepherds out in a field and says, "Don't be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy, which will be for all people. Today in the city of David, a Savior is born." Throughout the Christmas story, God chooses to use angels to announce and direct the events that are taking place. Hebrews 1:14 tells us that angels are ministering spirits sent by God to those who would inherit salvation. These are beautiful feet because of the message that they proclaim and bring to the people that are willing to listen. They announce the coming of Jesus, the long-awaited Savior. But don't miss this. This is key. These messengers are sent. They themselves are not the source. God is sending. Salvation, victory, peace, all come from God because He sent His Son. Decades later, Paul would speak again of these beautiful feet to Roman people. And he starts off by saying, there is no difference between Jews and non-Jews. Everyone who calls in the name of the Lord can be saved. But Paul asks the question, well, how are they going to know unless they hear from someone? And how will they hear unless someone tells them? And how will someone tell them unless someone sends somebody to tell them? But how beautiful are the feet of those who bring this good news. You see, God has sent people, and if you're hearing it today, this news is for you. You may not be Jewish, but you do feel bound up, enslaved, trapped, maybe in an addiction or a bad relationship or a different situation that you just don't know how to get out of. Maybe you feel scared. You wrestle with guilt or shame. Sometimes we feel distant from God and others. We feel aimless and lost, just like the Jewish people did. God sent Jesus to set us free, to bring us into relationship with God, and to forgive sin. He rose again to give us hope. And if you're thinking, well, maybe this is good for you, but you don't really know what I'm going through, well, let me give you another word from one of those angel messengers in the Christmas story. Nothing is impossible with God. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, and who say, our God reigns. Have a Merry Christmas.